Last season, we saw more managers using analytics to gain an edge in fantasy football. One manager using this cutting-edge technology was Fran, finishing 437th in the world. Welcome to FPL Mate. My name is Dan. It's time to learn a lot. Welcome back to the channel, FPL Fran. How are you, my friend?
It's a pleasure to be back. I was here last season, and I just really want to thank you for inviting me back. It's a pleasure.
No problem, man. Right, okay. So before we get started, I need to get a bit of glazing out the way. So prepare yourself. FPL Fran, I'm not even joking or exaggerating. I don't know if you even know this, Fran, but I watch literally every single one of your videos. You are genuinely one of my favorite FPL content creators and a genuine hidden gem of FPL content in general. The way you do your videos is so easy to follow along and understand, and you're a brilliant FPL manager as well. So in many ways, it is a pleasure for me to have you on my channel. I really, really do appreciate you coming on, man.
Nah, it's a pleasure to be back. As I said, last season, and even before the video started, I was talking to you about how I was actually considering stopping content, but you inviting me on the channel, kickstarting my preseason last season was huge for my channel, and I've been watching you really since 2021 in the Euros. If I want to throw back to then, just watching the amazing visuals, sort of every season, bring it back with new thumbnails, new content, animated backgrounds, charisma, everything. So like, yeah, it's a pleasure.
Everything but the FPL ability, I should say.
Well, I mean, FPL ability, I think you had probably a peak season rank that I would never have myself either. So you
got close. You got super close last season, close,
but not quite. Yeah.
Anyway, today we're going to go through Fran's current team, and we're going to have a little chat about it. And yeah, I want to get some learnings as well on how to play an analytical style of management as well, because that's something I definitely want to incorporate into my own game, and I think a lot of people should want to do the same, because you would probably agree that it benefited you last season, maybe.
Yeah, 100%. I think over the last 2 years, I've combined a little bit more analytics into my approach and progressively become more analytics than just purely eye test, which I was 3-4 seasons ago.
Okay, well, let's chuck a few players on the pitch, and then we will talk a little bit about what exactly that means, because I want to get some players on the pitch. I'm excited to see your team. So, should we start off in goal? Do you want to take me through your starting goalkeeper?
Yeah, my goalkeeper is Henderson right now. This is a spot that I think I'm open to changing, because clearly even he might not be the Crystal Palace #1, but I'm just taking the assumption that he will carry on as the #1 after the Johnson injury, like he did last season, and he'll continue to be the #1 for Crystal Palace, who actually have some pretty good fixtures at the start of the season, and also over the last 2 years have been a leading defense when we look at metrics like expected goals allowed.
Yeah, for sure. Like under Glasner, they really did thrive, but their defense wasn't too bad before that either, to be fair. They clearly have the personnel, and I think I tend to agree with you that Henderson looks the more likely starting goalkeeper for Palace, but I think some people are still a little bit worried about that. Are you still kind of waiting for new information before committing?
Yeah, 100%. I'm open to changing my mind, especially if I see with some more preseason friendlies that Johnson's starting over Henderson in them. I'd probably change my mind. I think I'm open to the ideas of maybe going for Flecken as a 4.5, just because there's also uncertainty around the Chelsea goalkeeper too.
Okay, so would you say you're locked in on a 4.5 goalkeeper then?
Yeah, that's the general idea I have. I think a lot of managers have different approaches to that, and the common joke around analytics managers is that they love Ederson and they love the suffering that comes with owning Ederson in the game. I'm a little bit more dogmatic in wanting to have a cheap goalkeeper and just sort of irrationally thinking that they'll outperform, and I prefer still spending my money within the outfield sort of 11.
Okay, so you touched there on analytical approach and choosing players that favor analytics. So just to maybe explain to people what that means is you're kind of looking for players who, well, in defense, you'd be looking for players who have the best underlying numbers that imply that they will get clean sheets in the future. Is that about right?
Yeah, no, I think you've hit the nail on the head. So effectively, the stat that we tend to use to correlate like a strong team defense is expected goals allowed. So it's almost like the inverse of XG, right? And it's almost all the shots that you face as a team by the opposing sort of attackers throughout the previous season, for example. Looking at that as a good metric to maybe say what's actually a good defense beyond just the clean sheets from the season past. And Ederson, as a Man City goalkeeper, clearly has always been a goalkeeper with really, really low expected goals conceded, and therefore we tend to think maybe more higher chance of getting a clean sheet, although it hasn't worked out quite so well. Although it did work out for Raya last season with Arsenal.
That's true.
Yeah.
So you're using that expected goals allowed stat to kind of see, okay, this defense is not conceding that many chances. Their defense must be pretty good, because otherwise they'd be conceding loads of shots and therefore a high amount of XG. If they're not, then hey, this must be a pretty good defense to pick from. And speaking of defenses, let's see what you got there. You got 3 defenders, right? Who are they?
Yeah, so for game week 1, I've got Trent Alexander-Arnold, Pedro Porro, and Dan Burn. But I've also got a defender on my bench who I'm going to be playing a little bit more than Burn, in Munoz from Crystal Palace as well.
Okay, we'll talk a little bit about more on your bench players towards the end of the video. But,
yeah, absolutely.
Let's have a look at this. So Trent, I think, is in a lot of content creator teams right now. Are you thinking 7 million is decent value for him?
I think he's not exactly a season-long pick, if I could say so myself. But the run is really too sweet for Liverpool for me to ignore Trent, particularly with the Robertson injury as well. I imagine Robertson could come back into the team maybe around game week 2, maybe even some sparse minutes in game week 1. But tentatively, that just means also a strengthening towards Trent in getting more set pieces, I'd imagine, unless he defers a little bit more to Sobo. There's just the aspect where when they have such a good run of games, you'd imagine that as such an attacking fullback, his numbers would also be amplified. So I just generally like the fixture slate for Liverpool to be able to go Trent in game week 1.
Absolutely. I mean, even if like Liverpool, they aren't like the best defense in the league, but they are one of the better defenses. And in easier fixture runs, you might expect them to maybe keep a few more clean sheets. But I guess what you're saying is the big advantage with Trent is because you have access to the attacking potential from these easier fixtures, not just the defense, I guess.
Yeah, 100%. That's it. And going back to your point on clean sheets, they're definitely, a tier below City and maybe 2 tiers below Arsenal. But when you see a good run of games like this, I think as an analytics manager, you tend to think when the fixture run is easier, that generally speaking, the almost average clean sheet that you expect would be a little bit higher than over a medium run or a difficult run. So definitely all things go towards Trent's favor for the start.
Okay, so you've got a decent defense with solid fixtures. So the decent defense is kind of amplified and will go up in your, I guess, rankings of the kind of players you want to pick.
Yeah.
Nice. Okay, next defender.
Pedro Porro. So this is a bit of a controversial one because I assume people would be thinking Guardiola, and that's definitely the main defender that would be contending to join my team. But I am angling for a wild card 6 with my team, and I do like Tottenham's run of games up until game week 5. Right, game week 5 is a good game. The only real tough game there is the one versus Arsenal, where I just imagine I don't have much of a chance of a clean sheet at all, or even an attacking return from Pedro Porro. But he was also one that was quite badly hurt by the bonus changes. I believe just looking at the bonus changes, he probably lost around was it maybe around 7 points worth, but it was a pretty big reduction in terms of his overall points viability. But once again, I do think that the Tottenham opening fixtures are quite good. I think with City also maybe losing Rodri for the start, I'm not exactly thinking that they'll be an absolute brick wall. So for me, I like the idea of going for Pedro Porro, who is just consistently in great attacking position. So whilst he might lose bonus, the reality is he can still get offensive returns, and I do like that about Pedro Porro.
Definitely an upside pick. Like he has the potential to get a nice big score that I think we're all hunting for as FPL managers. And finally, you've got Dan Burn. I know you said Pedro Porro was a little bit of a controversial pick, but I would argue that Burn is more controversial, particularly among Newcastle fans, which you kind of mentioned to me before we started recording. So yeah, let's hear the Burn logic so people can maybe understand that a little bit more.
Yeah, just looking at preseason so far, he's still had starts, and whilst most Newcastle fans would probably want Burn out of their ideal starting 11, you still have the season starting with Botman injured, with Kelly joining the team, with Kraft also closing the season out quite well, and Shara probably coming back after a break. But I still think that just looking at the minutes that Burn has played over the last 2 seasons, that he's clearly been an important player for Eddie Howe, and I can't imagine that would change that quickly into the start of the season. I still think that he would play in Gameweek 1, which is the crucial fixture for me for Burn to play in. Otherwise, he's really going to be fielding a role in the team almost as a bench option, an ideal auto sub. But here in Gameweek 1, I want him to just play at a great fixture in Southampton at home, and that's sort of his job, and I'm assuming that he'd be the player I'd expect to have the best minutes out of a Newcastle 4.5 defender. But once again, totally open to changing my mind to maybe pivoting towards out of Newcastle or looking towards a fullback like, let's say, Hall or Livramento. But for now, as I said, I know what Newcastle fans think about Burn, but I tend to just look at the minutes someone has played, what the manager says about them, and whether that whether what the fans are saying is bearing a little bit of fruit. And in this case, I think not yet with Burn, so pretty comfortable with having him in my draft for now.
Well, it's a great fixture. I've noticed that all 3 of your defenders play newly promoted teams in Game Week 1. Was that by design or purely coincidence?
I think it is by design, but it's not necessarily just because they're newly promoted teams. I struggled to find someone in the 4.5 position who would effectively have a good Game Week 1 fixture, and I didn't really like playing Munoz for Game Week 1, so Burn fills in here. But if I didn't have so much importance over Game Week 1, I'd probably have dropped Burn, but I think Porro and Trent are here to stay, especially attacking fixtures like Ipswich and Leicester.
Nice, man. Let's go through your midfield. Let's put them all on the screen. I want to start with the most expensive guy. I want to start with your premium guy. I want to talk about Saka, who you've got here in your team. I love this pick personally. I'm not seeing him in enough drafts. I'm not going to lie. I'm trying to get him back into my own draft. He does come at the cost of Salah, though, for me. So presumably You've made a similar decision there. So all of your midfielders are now on the screen. Do you want to talk a little bit about Salah and Saka and what advantages that you feel like you've gained by dropping Salah, I guess?
Yeah, so I think with Salah, you probably have to say that when you go for a Salah-only draft, he appears as the ideal captaincy option almost week to week. And that includes even over Haaland, with exception to maybe Game Week 2. I do generally like Saka's run of games within Game Weeks 1 to, let's say, 3. And I see an opportunity to maybe pivot into Son around Game Week 5, because that is what I see as the worst captaincy week for Haaland only sort of drafts. And that's sort of the thinking that I have behind playing Saka over Salah.
So just to jump in quickly there,
go for it.
Saka and Haaland, Arsenal and Man City, they play each other in Game Week 5, right? So that is definitely something that we all need to be aware of when we're planning our captaincies, particularly if you're not starting off with Salah, I guess.
Yeah, and that's exactly the point. So I think there's a bit of a sacrifice on my part here not having Salah, but then it's also the upside of going for Haaland. And I think going back to my analytics background as well, I tend to like having some stronger benches than most to allow for rotation, but then also for to almost prevent inevitable situations like injuries coming to the floor and things like that. So it was tough for me to really consider a Salah and Haaland draft with the price changes this year, particularly towards Haaland. And that's why I've lent back towards someone like Saka for my Game Week 1 draft here as almost a replacement for Salah. But the captaincies will probably still lean towards Haaland's favor early doors. I just like the position that Saka holds within the draft in being able to be a direct replacement for maybe Foden in the future, Son, or even Palmer if I find 0.5 to squeeze at one point in time. So it's not necessarily that I just like Saka that much in Game Week 1. I just think it's likely that within my draft I'll want to rotate between a lot of the sub premiums I would call in that area that are around 10 million in price, and that's why I also like Saka over maybe, let's say, an Odegaard or someone who's a little bit cheaper, for example, within a draft structure.
Okay, now you touched on a really good point there. I think it's another real key, like, great piece of advice is that you've got Saka in many ways because of his price point of being around 10 million, and having a player at that price point allows you to easily pivot to, like you say, if you want to go for a Foden, well, Saka to Foden. If you want to go Son, Saka to Son. If you did have a Odegaard here instead of a Saka, it's much more difficult to move an Odegaard to a Son or a Palmer or a Foden because they cost a little bit more money. Similar with Salah, you'd be leaving a lot of money in the bank. If you did want to make a downgrade to one of those other midfielders, and there's so many midfielders in that price point, and I think they're going to play a real key role in how we play FPL this year. Those kind of 8.5 to 10 million-ish midfielders, I guess. It's going to be interesting.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I think a lot of people probably thought that the pricing was a little bit too harsh on certain players, but that sort of strength in pricing suggests that FPL thinks these sorts of players are worth captaining on those odd weeks where, as you mentioned in Game Week 5, when Haaland plays Arsenal, you'd ideally like to captain someone else. And so it makes sense that they've upped the prices of all these players, at least to match the sort of price point of Son, who we were definitely captaining a couple of times last season as well. So really keen and fond of the pricing changes that were made this year.
You've also got Bruno Fernandes in here, who I guess is just slightly below, I guess, on the that kind of price range. Your reasoning behind his inclusion?
Yeah, I tend to see Bruno as a pick that nothing can really go wrong with him because he has so many tools to get FPL points. This was probably in replacement of what a lot of people own in Anthony Gordon in their own respective drafts. I'm going for Bruno because I still think right now Trippier's a Newcastle player. It's likely that he could still play for them this season. And when you compare, let's say, Gordon to Bruno, the things that he would currently lack if Trippier would still be in the team is things like set pieces, the penalty share as well, which I recognize, of course, Bruno likes to give penalties to Rashford here and there, but he's still the sort of dominant penalty taker for the team. And despite United having a slightly poor run of games after Game Week 1, I just think he's quite strong, very much like Gordon, who has, as I said, a great Game Week 1 fixture, slightly worse fixtures after that, but is an option that you don't really have to think too much about. Ideally, I wouldn't have to transfer out Bruno because I think that he's just generally at a good price point to be close to maybe set and forget at various points in the season. And I, as I said, don't have really any transfers booked in that position for Bruno, so hopefully he'll stay within the draft.
Definitely the kind of guy who could just tick along nicely and just continue to pick you up points. And like you say, there's many avenues in which he can get points. And finally, in your midfield, you've got Nkunku and Eze, two slightly cheaper guys. I think everyone's on the same page with Eze, generally speaking, so I don't think we need to talk about him too much. Nkunku seems to divide a lot of people, though. Like, people either love him or hate him, but I'm guessing you're such a level-headed guy, you're probably going to be somewhere in the middle, right?
Certainly somewhere in the middle, but just like you, I think you tweeted out something to the effect of Nkunku becomes, more almost locked in your draft day to day, and I think nothing has really changed based on watching Chelsea in the preseason so far. So as a bit of an analytics manager, I care quite a lot about minutes and getting the guarantee of minutes from a certain player. I can't see Nkunku losing too many minutes under Maresca. I think the positions that he's played in the preseason wouldn't really be interfered with, with Palmer coming back into the team, which I think is nice. Only Jackson would be coming in the center forward position, and I know Nkunku has been mentioned to be able to play multiple positions, but it's clear he's sort of playing almost as a left 10 right now, or some people would sort of argue as like a left advanced 8. But yeah, because his minutes look really good, and I'm still flattered by the baselines and the great underlying figures that he's put in, and even actual figures, right? When we go back to those sort of Bundesliga numbers, they're amazing. Yes, Game Week 1 isn't a lovely fixture for Nkunku, but he's a player I don't really have too many issues with putting into my draft right now, considering all the potential positives really that go in his favor.
There really is just so it's very clear that if this pick goes well, it could go very well. Like, obviously there is obviously potential to go wrong, but the ceiling on this pick is really, really good. It's really for the price that he is. You won't get a ceiling like you can get from Nkunku. You get some other players like Bailey, I guess, who looks great. Szoboszlai looks great for 6.5, but are they going to be able to be? Like, Nkunku is a potential, probably maybe not the top scorer of the Premier League, because Haaland is going to do that every year. But if Nkunku was scored 15 to 20 goals this season, you would not be surprised by that at all.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. I mean, in terms of the underlying data as well, I only Brennan Johnson might compare it to him. You've mentioned Bailey, who's also really high up there as well. But yeah, Nkunku, if he hit double-digit figures for both goals and assists, I don't think I'd be that shocked.
There you go. All right, let's go to the forward positions. Obviously, you've got Isak in. He's a player that I'm bored of talking about because he's just the most obvious pick. If you don't have Isak in your team at this point, there is no helping you. I'm sorry. He is so obviously the best, the best pick in the game at his price. I mean, am I exaggerating there?
No, I think any FPL manager would find it very hard to have a draft without Isak, and for many good reasons. Yeah, we don't need to talk about him too much.
No, Haaland, we can speak about him a little bit. I know you touched on him earlier, but why is it that you are in favour of going for Haaland over Salah? Because my understanding was that Salah was actually going to be the analytical pick for the start of the season if you had to go with one, and obviously you've gone for Haaland. So yeah, I'm super curious to why you've ended on Haaland.
It's an interesting thing because I started my first draft with Salah as well, but then I do think it comes down to your conception of how good Haaland is and how good Game Week 2 is at the end of the day. Because whilst I mentioned Haaland has an issue with Game Week 5 with Arsenal, and that clearly means you'd need to have another captaincy option compared to, let's say, Salah, who basically is a permanent captaincy option between Game Weeks 1 to 6. I think that there's a choice between a lot of analytics managers being made right now about maybe the minutes of someone like Salah coming in with slot, whether he's going to be a perma 90-minute player, which is very likely anyways before the Champions League starts, and given the lack of depth within that certain position. But then Haaland as well, fit, ready to play 90 minutes. Unfortunately, has the niggles, apparently, confirmed by Pep Guardiola. So we'll find out.
According to Pep Guardiola, I swear that he uses that word so often. Whatever, but yeah, you're right.
I mean, we'll get information around the Community Shield, and that is still 2 weeks away effectively, and we will get insight as to whether Haaland is going to be within our Game Week 1 drafts and whether he's fit and ready to play. But assuming that he is, which is the purpose of a Haaland only draft being presented here, I think the toss-up once again is how much you value Haaland at his present age. When I even look at some of the projections for some of the sort of market odds for Haaland, they remain extremely strong, whereas this year Salah, I've noticed, has dipped a little bit compared to even last season's projections, where he was also destined to go to AFCON. So assuming that you think that goal projections are pretty linear to the amount of games you have in the season, effectively betting markets have suggested that Salah is going to perform a little bit worse than last season. And part of that might just be the Jurgen Klopp effect, moving towards a new manager, but then also natural sort of age regression, which, Salah is a unique player. I've seen the preseason photos already. He looks great. But the reality is maybe you're asking the question right now of who would you like to back it as of Game Week 1. I suppose the young player with the niggles or the almost eternally fit Salah. And right now I'm leaning towards Haaland is all in. And maybe it's also because I tend to prefer getting the Game Week 2 captaincy right, and not having to necessarily move away from a Haaland draft structure with also an early wildcard in mind.
That's completely fair enough. I think I'm on a Haaland draft myself at the moment,
Right.
and one thing that from watching one of your videos actually that really kind of gave me confidence as someone going for Haaland was that you said that correct me if I'm not exactly right here, but you said something like his the betting markets have him at around 27 goals this season, and the second best was like, what was it, like 18 goals. So he's like expected to be the top scorer by like 9 goals this year.
Yeah, I think so players around Salah's range is 18, 19. I've seen a little bit of movement there, but Haaland, I believe, also is hitting a slightly upper bound of 28 now from last I checked.
Wow.
So it just shows you how much confidence people have in Haaland. And to be honest, that was the goal tally that he hit last season, right? 27 goals. And that was considered a slight dip from his previous season.
That's a poor season for Haaland. Is 28 goals. That's crazy. That
Exactly.
We're even saying
And that's sort of why I feel a little bit more confident starting Game Week 1 with Haaland at the end of the day.
Absolutely. Right. The final forward that you have here is Armstrong, which I'm like looking through your team. I'm like, yeah, this makes sense. It gets to Armstrong, I'm like, are you sure? Are you sure? But hey, you know better than me. Sell Armstrong to me and everyone watching.
I think when people look at Armstrong, they just think find 0.5 million to spend towards Wood or Muniz, some proven Premier League players who scored goals in the past. What I have to say about Armstrong is I think we've moved on from a time period where the relegation teams were completely incapable of scoring. I do recognize that Burnley and Sheffield United have something to say about that from last season. But generally speaking, even those two teams were slightly better than some of the offenses of the past, like teams like Burnley, who were constantly evading relegation in the past. And we've seen a general sort of inflation of goal scoring, and the teams that have benefited are even within the sort of bottom half of the table. So that's my confidence for a team like Southampton, not necessarily in defense, but just that they are still and should be able to score goals from time to time within the Premier League. Armstrong, going back to the goal projections, still is around at, I think, between 9 and 10 goals for this season. So it clearly suggests that he will be capable of scoring. Between Game Weeks 2 and 5 specifically, he's really good fixtures. Just looking at all the forwards, I think his minutes should be really good. I know Ben Bertrand Diaz just signed for 7 million from Villarreal, but I can't see his minutes really being impacted because Armstrong can play multiple roles for the team. Just looking at his minutes last season, I think he played north of 4,000 minutes in the championship and was leading within the minutes for Southampton. I can't see his sort of importance to the team changing. I certainly didn't see any changes to his goal projections after the Ben Bertrand Diaz signing. So I'm generally quite confident in a player, particularly, given my sort of flavor for analytics. I like players who play 90 minutes. I like players who are on penalties. I also like players who ultimately won't force a transfer within a few weeks' time if it goes wrong, because at 5.5, I think he's still good value. I'm still keeping an open eye towards João Pedro and sort of fitness news there. That's probably the only pick I'd really change Armstrong for. I spoke about Muniz and Wood. Those are two picks that also interest me for now, but I don't really see the gap between, let's say, Armstrong, Muniz, and Wood being that insane. So that's sort of maybe my hot take per se for this episode.
Wow, well, there we go. I do see your point. Players like a Wood or Muniz, I do maybe have more potential to go wrong than someone like Armstrong, who is more reliable, certainly from a minutes perspective. And if that is a priority for you to find those players that are getting regular minutes, and you think that's a style of management that is working for you, then hey, Armstrong is the guy for you, right? But still, I look at Nottingham Forest and Fulham's fixtures, and I see the record of these players from last season, and I think, could we hit something big here? But I guess Armstrong is going to be more, again, kind of like Bruno for you, like more reliable, nicely ticking along. You don't have to transfer them in or out. They just stay in your team, and you focus your attention really on other areas of your team to try and hit those bigger returns, maybe.
Yeah, I think the sweet spot maybe in the middle is actually going to be Muniz, right? Because Chris Wood, we tend to think he should start the season. He has the preference of Nuno, but I think they've also signed another attacking player within the squad. But we tend to think that Taiwo is a much more capable replacement, at this day and age compared to Raul Jimenez, as a bit of a backup to Muniz. So Muniz might be the player that I could see myself pivoting towards, but then I'd have to be really comfortable that he's going to have perfect minutes, because he's also someone who unfortunately doesn't have penalty. Whereas with Chris Wood, I can still say that's up in the air. I've never seen Morgan Gibbs-White take a penalty, whilst Chris Wood, who I believe is 29-3 in his lifetime, very, very good penalty taker. And a lot of people are still set on the idea that Morgan Gibbs-White is a penalty taker. I'm not so sure about that, but I guess with Armstrong, I wouldn't have to ask too many questions. It's a bit of a, I would say, high floor, low ceiling pick, if we want to put it like that. And definitely the worst player in my draft that I will be playing week to week.
Fair enough. I mean, you have got a couple of players I think are playable on your bench if Armstrong did really, really disappoint you for whatever reason. Let's throw your bench on the screen. Fabianski is presumably just a filler spot if Areola happens to get injured. Or I actually have seen some rumors of Areola maybe moving to Saudi Arabia. I don't know how true that is.
Is that true? That could be interesting.
Yeah.
Areola's also had a couple injuries, if I recall. So who knows? Maybe if the wrist isn't working, Fabianski could come in for a game or two.
Hey, there you go. But yeah, I think Winks, again, is one of those players who's going to sit third on your bench pretty much every single game week, unless you have some kind of disaster where you get 5 red cards in a game week or something like that. But a great 2-point merchant for the bench. But you've got 2 really interesting defenders in here that I actually love both of these picks, and I'd like to hear your thoughts on both of them, starting with Munoz. How do you say his name? Munoz?
I would say Munoz, but then a Colombian might actually say Munoz, because the way they pronounce the Z or the Z is slightly different. I would say Munoz as a Spaniard, but yeah.
By the way, obviously, anyone who doesn't know this, Fran is Spanish, and Fran can't see this right now, but I'm actually wearing a Spain international football shirt right now. Just a little shout out for you, man. But yeah, right wing back for Crystal Palace, super attacking. You like him a lot, I guess.
Yeah, I think he's like basically Pedro Porro as a Crystal Palace defender. Extremely attacking, takes a lot of shots per game. I think he takes more shots per game than both Udogie and Pedro Porro do, and we tend to look at them as extremely attacking players, being allowed and given the license to attack and open play by their respective managers. So that's nice for Munoz. As a Spaniard, I've had the pleasure of watching him score against us in a live friendly as well in an international game. So there's that too. But in reality, the underlying numbers are really good. Crystal Palace, as we mentioned, pretty good defense historically. Not much has really changed under Glasner, and he's been the main star who has gotten his big break under Glasner. I can't see that changing too much. So just an extremely attacking player.
Absolutely. Yeah, really like this pick. Might be worth that extra 0.5. The way I see Munoz is kind of like you kind of compared him to Pedro Porro, but he's like Pedro Porro if he played for a better defense in many ways. So I think he's I think he's a really, really, really nice pick. You've also got Barco here. We spoke a little about him before we started recording, and that you're really hot on this guy and you want to kind of take a chance on him. He's 4 million. He is a left back. He plays for Brighton. What else could you give to me about him?
He's taking set pieces now, and Pascal Gross has just left the club to Dortmund, so who knows if he can take even more. Maybe some indirect free kicks, as opposed to just the corners that I think I've seen him take in the preseason so far. So that could be a little bit more upside injected in there. The key reason for really going for him is, when you look at the 4.0 picks, you're looking at players like Howard Bellis, maybe Johnson if you want an attacker from Ipswich, maybe Wout Faze, but Leicester don't really have great fixtures until, I would say, Game Week 7 onwards. And so you're looking at players with center backs, really. It doesn't get much better than that. You don't expect too much from these promoted teams, especially as a quality, defense. When we look at last season, the only thing that I think was redeeming about any of the teams who got relegated was definitely Luton's offense as opposed to their defense. So I think that's a huge step up that I have yet to see a promoted team, maybe, with exception to Brentford, show a high level quality defense. So I like Barco a lot at 4.0. The idea here within my draft specifically is targeting Game Week 4, where Pedro Porro faces Arsenal. And that would be the only week where I can see myself benching Pedro Porro, and hopefully Barco would still be the starting player at the time, playing Ipswich at home in Game Week 4. And we know that Estupiñán's injury timeline is a little bit murky, actually. I've heard contrasting reports, some people saying end of August, some people saying going to September as well. But the general idea is a player has to come back. He has to build some fitness. And he'll also have to build match fitness too. So I can't see him immediately deposing a young, talented player like Barco, who already has acclimated himself really well into the team for the preseason. And that's it, really. Just hopefully getting a little bit more upside than your run-of-the-mill 4.0 defenders. And especially since I am targeting that early wild card, why not?
I completely agree with you there. Like, it's about putting yourself in the position to maybe get the fortune of Barco playing for a longer time. You have a choice. And the sacrifice here really is you're sacrificing a slot in your team for a 4 million defender that you're probably never going to play. So you don't really lose anything by going for Barco. And if it works out, Everton is the first game. If he gets a clean sheet there, we could see a small price increase for him. So you've banked a little bit of team value. If he's continuing to play up until Game Week 4, you get that Ipswich fixture. There's a lot of things that could go well here. And you're sacrificing, Harwood Bellis or a Fass, who I'm guessing you would never play anyway. So, why not, right?
Yeah, 100%.
There you go. Right. Before we wrap up the video, captains, vice captains, not as important, but yeah, captain for Game Week 1. Who are you thinking right now?
I'm thinking Isak. I mean, you said he's the most essential player in FPL. He might be the most essential captain in Game Week 1.
So you're not even thinking about Haaland against Chelsea?
No, actually, I'd probably consider
team.
Saka vice captain over Haaland even. But that's simply because I love my home fixtures. And as much as Chelsea have looked like a horrific defending unit, and I have had the pleasure, I suppose, of watching 2 Nkunku preseason goals, but also just in general the Chelsea defense, I'd still lean towards targeting the fixtures here and going for Isak and Saka respectively as my captain, vice captain.
Fair enough. I mean, I really like your team in general. It's clearly strong. It's clearly well thought about, and you have a really nice balance here between, some sensible picks, some players who are just reliable picks, and you have a little bit of spice there. Players like Munoz, I think, is a little bit spicy. I don't think too many people will be picking him. Pedro Porro maybe similar, like these players that have that high upside that can do some damage. So I think your team is actually really, really well balanced in general. You've got a little bit of everything for me. So I'm a big fan of it. Is there any final tips you could give me or anyone who is interested in playing a more analytical game? How can they do that? Where would you start?
I think some nice websites would be Fantasy Football Hub or FBref. Hub actually have
Fantasy Football Hub. We could definitely hype them out as a sponsor of the channel and a sponsor of your channel as well, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, they are. But going back to Hub, it's almost the Opta stats that I'm religiously following, right? So you can kind of look at the expected goals per 90 or expected assists per 90 of a player, and you can try to infer that clearly it's important that these players get 90 minutes. Otherwise, that sort of data isn't really particularly useful. So I think rationalizing the amount of minutes a certain player has is something that a lot of managers need to do or get comfortable with, because when you look at a player like Watkins, he might have some unflattering underlying stats, not necessarily at the level of Isak's per se, but he is someone who will continuously play almost 90 minutes a game. So does Solanke. But we can say for a lot of the other forwards in the league that they tend to play much less minutes. And so you don't get the same sort of value for their per 90 stats there. So I think it's a case of when you use data, just try to be reasonable with it. Try to understand how that might translate into a game. Think about the minutes of a certain player. And also don't try to overread into data as well. When we start the season in Game Week 1, when we play a few game weeks in, don't suddenly close yourself off to the data that we had for 38 games of football last season, and just restrict yourself to Game Week 1, Game Week 2, Game Week 3, three game weeks of sample size. Try to be a bit rational with what is a small sample size and the short term, and what we have a little bit of comfort in the past as well. And just enjoy, I suppose, your journey if you're trying to integrate a little bit of data and analytics into your gameplay.
That is some fantastic advice, and I think people are going to take a lot from that. I really, really hope they do. Fran, massive thank you for joining me on the channel today. If anyone would like to go and check out Fran's content, there will be a link to his YouTube channel in the top of the description, so you can check it out right away. I cannot recommend this YouTube channel enough. Like I say, this is a YouTube channel I watch all the time, every single video. I don't miss a video. It is one of my favorites, and I think you guys are going to absolutely love it as well. Presents data really well. It's really intuitive and helps you to understand how to play a more analytical game, and hopefully maybe try and achieve something like the rank that you achieved last season, Fran, because that is absolutely nuts. Anything you would like to finish off with saying for the video?
Well, look, it's always a pleasure to be on. I am really happy about the new project that you've announced this season, which is your podcast. So if anyone's looking for more content, feel free to subscribe to that as well.
Shouting me out on my own channel. This is such a nice guy. Fran is just such the nicest guy ever, man. Honestly. But guys, we are gonna leave it there. If you did enjoy this one, make sure you do drop a like, do subscribe, not just to me, but also to Fran as well. And I'll see you on the next one. See you later, mates. Bye bye.